Okay friends, it's time to get started on replacing our spark plugs. Now there's going to be 3 spark plugs that are pretty easy to get to. They're going to be located underneath each of these coils right here. There's going to be 3 others though that are located on the rearward bank, which is located right underneath this plastic intake. I'm going to go ahead and get this right out of the way so I can show you how to get to the hardest ones. Alright, let's get started right over here on the air filter box. I'm going to go ahead and start popping the clips for this. You're going to find 2 of them. One right here. Then there should be another one right here. Ours is missing. Go ahead and pop that off. Come right over to this vent hose right here. We're going to give it a little twist. Remove it. We'll give it a squeeze. Make sure it's still in good enough condition. We can set that aside. Move right up along here. Let's go ahead and squeeze on this tab. Go ahead and lift this up and off of here. Every time you remove an electrical connector, you want to inspect it. If you see any funny colors, it's corrosion and it needs to be dealt with. This looks fine, so I'll set it aside. Now let's move along to removing the snorkel for this. There's going to be a clamp located right here. For that, you can use a flathead screwdriver or an 8mm socket. We're just going to loosen that up enough to slide this off. Go ahead and grab onto that air filter box. We're going to separate the 2. Come up here. We're going to separate this from the throttle body. Sometimes a light wiggle will break that free. Go ahead and remove this from the vehicle. We'll also remove the air filter just to get it out of the way. Now let's come right up to the top of the throttle body. You can see the electrical connector with a red locking tab. Let's go ahead and slide this locking tab to unlock this. Once it's unlocked, go ahead and squeeze. We'll pop this off of here. Inspect it, of course. Set it aside. Now we're going to move down along this area to this bracket. This is going to be holding the throttle body on here. What we need to do is go ahead and remove this 10mm headed nut right here, and then move down here to the 13mm headed bolt right there. After that, we'll go ahead and get the bracket right out of the way so we can continue on by removing the throttle body from the intake. Now let's move along to this area up along the top of the intake. We can see another electrical connector. Let's go ahead and grab onto that red tab. We're going to unlock this. Now that it's unlocked, let's go ahead and grab onto this tab, squeeze that in, give this a little wiggle, remove it, inspect it, set it aside. Let's continue on along the driver's side of the intake here. You can see that you have your vacuum booster hose right across here. Let's go ahead and pull this off of there, then move along to this one. Now let's move a little bit further back on the intake. You're going to find one more hose here. Go ahead and pop that off of there as well. Next, we're going to continue on to removing the EGR tube from the intake. You're going to find 2 8mm headed bolts. There's one on the forward aspect and then a little bit further back right there. Go ahead and remove the pair. Now at this point, we're going to move along to removing the EGR tube from the EGR. You're going to find 2 8mm headed bolts. There's one right here and one located a little bit further in that's kind of hard to get to. For this, I'll just use an 8mm socket, a short extension, and my ratchet, and try to get all these out. You want to be careful with these bolts. Of course, they do go through a lot of heat cycles and they could potentially twist and break. Well, we can start getting this one out of here as well. Now at this point, we can go ahead and grab right onto that EGR tube and we'll slide it out of the way. Now let's move along to the passenger side of the intake. We want to go ahead and disconnect this electrical connector. You're going to see that red locking tab like what you've seen before. Go ahead and pull that down, squeeze the tab, remove it. After that, we'll do the same to this one right over here. That looks good. There it is. Okay, check that connector. We'll set that aside. Now the next thing we want to start doing is unbolting the intake from the engine. Most of our bolts are going to be right out in the open, approximately in this area right here, but there are 2 bolts that are kind of hidden on the back side of the engine. One of those bolts is going to be located towards the passenger side of the intake. Essentially, if you were to look all the way back at the firewall, you can see where those 2 heater core hoses go into it. You're going to find one 12mm headed bolt. And if you were to come over towards the passenger side a little bit further to directly behind where we connected this right here, you're going to find the second one. Let's go ahead and remove the pair, and then we can continue on to our other mounting bolts. All right, now that we have those rearward bolts out of here, let's move along to the front. You're going to find 7 of these 10mm headed bolts. Here, 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 and there. Let's remove all of them. Now let's go ahead and carefully grab onto the intake. We're going to give it a little shake to try to break it free from the engine. After that, carefully lift it up and away from the engine compartment. Now that we have the intake off, the areas that you want to pay attention to are these ports right along here. You want to be super sure that nothing falls inside of here, such as a nut, a bolt, or even any miscellaneous debris that you happen to see around this area. Before we continue removing anything else, let's just go ahead and cover up these ports to protect the engine. Now the next thing that we're going to do is come right over here to our coil. The process for this is going to be the same for any of the coils or the spark plugs. So we're just going to go ahead and grab onto this right here, give it a little squeeze, and remove it. Inspect it, as always, and then we'll come right up to the top right here where you can find a 10mm headed bolt. Go ahead and remove that bolt, and then remove your coil. The next thing that we're going to need to use is a 5/8 spark plug socket. The reason why you need to use a spark plug socket is because deep down inside you can see that there's a rubber grommet. That rubber grommet is going to hold onto the spark plug, so when you try to remove the socket, the spark plug will come with it. Just put it right onto my extension. We'll get it into position. Turn it counterclockwise to remove it. There it is, friends. All right, now it's going to be time to get ready to install our brand new spark plugs. But before we go ahead and do that, we need to take a quick peek at them. There's areas that you're going to want to inspect. Up along this area here is the ground strap. It's very common for these to become damaged during shipping, so you just want to go ahead and check it and make sure it's not completely peened down up against the electrode that you can see down next to the ceramic area here. This one looks good. Also, the area that we want to pay attention to is all along this area here. You want to inspect this and make sure you don't see any cracks. If you do, either way, the spark plug needs to be replaced. This one looks great, so let's get ready for our install. Let's go ahead and take that new spark plug. We're going to slide it right into our socket. Make sure it can't fall out. Now we'll just carefully get this lined up with the spark plug hole. Start putting this in by hand. Essentially, we're just going to go ahead and bottom this out. After that, we'll go ahead and torque each of the spark plugs to 20 foot-pounds. Now we'll just carefully take this. We're going to gently slide it down, making sure that it's sliding into where it needs to be properly. Slide it right down, line up your bolt hole. We'll go ahead and put in our mounting bolt. We'll snug it up, and then we're going to torque that to 71 inch-pounds. Plug in your electrical connector, listen for a click. Give it a tug to make sure it's secure. Now at this point, the process will be the exact same for all the rest. All right, so let's go ahead and get the cover off of this, and then we have to clean up the area where the seal needs to be. This is going to be easiest using a nice flat razor blade like this. What I want to do is just carefully come flat like that and gently start pulling everything away from the inside of the engine here. You don't want to go ahead and press anything inside there because you could cause some damage. Just go ahead and wipe off your razor blade every once in a while and continue on until this is perfectly clean. Now, once we have the engine fully clean, let's move along to the lower aspect of the intake. On that, you're going to find that there should be a gasket that looks just like this, and generally it's pressed into this area here. What you're going to want to do is just carefully start pulling it right out of here. Usually what I do is I just kind of inspect it real quick just to see if I find any deficiencies or something defective with it, and then generally I match it up to a new one. After that, what I like to do is just go ahead and wipe down this entire area. We want to make sure that there isn't any debris on it. Now, like I said, generally you'd want to replace the gasket, but if for some reason you weren't replacing the gasket, what you need to at least do is go ahead and wipe it down, and then you need to stretch it. Basically, we're just kind of working it around. I'm trying to make sure that it's still soft and pliable, and it's not broken, torn, worn, or cracked in any way. Just check all of the portholes. After that, you're just going to want to line it up with the intake so it lines up perfectly like this, and then we're just going to carefully press it in. We'll go all the way across the intake, making sure that it's in as far as it can, and then just double check it. You need to make sure that it's not falling out, because if for some reason you had it sitting like this, and then you went ahead and put the intake on here, it's going to crimp this down, it's not going to make a good seal, and you're going to have a serious running condition. Let's carefully get this intake into position here. we're going to line up all of our bolts down along this area on the engine. Make sure it's sitting properly. Double check everything. We're looking to make sure we don't have any of that gasket hanging out anywhere. This looks great. Now at this point, we're going to continue on by snugging up all of these forward bolts right here. When we do this, we need to do it in a specific order, and then once they're all snugged, we're also going to torque them in the same order. Now let's use our 10 millimeter. We're going to start right in the center bolt here. We'll just bottom this out. Now we'll move over here, basically going diagonal. Let's get this other forward bolt right here. At this point, we've created a triangle. We'll move out to this area. This one. Over here. And then all the way over here. Now we're going to torque each of these to 105 inch-pounds. All right, so we still have the intake nice and loose. Let's go ahead and take our bolts, and we're going to start putting in those bracket bolts. I'm just going to reach right along the back. You can start with either of the bracket bolts you'd like. We're just going to get this into the bracket hole. We'll start it in by hand, then snug it up. All right, so I've got this one started in. Now I'm going to go over and do the same on the passenger side. Once everything's started, we'll snug it up and torque everything to manufacturer's specification. Now that we have all the intake bolts tightened up along the top of the engine, let's make our way to the back of the engine and we'll snug up those mounting bolts as well. Now we can make our way over towards the passenger side of the intake and we'll start reconnecting our electrical connectors. Make sure that the red tab is in the unlocked position, which would be towards this tab. We'll go ahead and press this in, and then once it is, we'll go ahead and lock it down. Listen for a click. I'm going to give it a little tug, make sure it's secure. Press that red tab. Now we're going to do the same to the other one. Listen for that click, give it a tug, lock it in. Now we can do the electrical connectors along the driver's side over here. Press that in, give it a little wiggle, make sure it's locked. Now we can do the throttle body. Now let's make our way back here. We're going to reconnect this hose into the back side of the intake here. Should just slide right in. Make sure that's nice and snug. If it feels like it's loose and it wants to fall off, you can use a wire tie or something to hold it on there. All right, now it's time for the EGR tube. Let's go ahead and get ready to put this in. Now this area right up along here is the area that's going to go right inside the intake here. You should have this nice gasket on there. Just make sure it's nice and soft and pliable. Typically this is a reusable item. Start sliding this right into the intake here. Get that so it wants to line up. Now we're going to pay attention down along the bottom here where the EGR tube wants to line up with the EGR. We're going to go ahead and get those semi-close together. We can grab onto our gasket. We'll start that in between the area. Now essentially I'm just trying to line up the bolt holes between the tube, the gasket, and of course the EGR itself. Once you have that on there, go ahead and start in one of your mounting bolts. Once that one's started, go ahead and start in the other one. Leave them loose and then continue up top. Now that I have both of those started and it's still semi-loose, let's continue up along the top here. We're going to come right up to this area. We'll get our bracket lined up, or the plate. Now we can start in both of those mounting screws. All right, now that everything's started, let's go ahead and bottom it out. Now that we have both of these bolts on there and snugged, let's go ahead and torque each of these to 106 inch-pounds. Now we can tighten the top two bolts as well. We'll do these to 45 inch-pounds. Now the next thing we're going to do is move along to connecting in our hoses that go to this area. Obviously the smaller one's going to go to the smaller port. Slide it right on there. Once again, we're always making sure that these are nice and secure. If they're loose, just use a wire tie. So now at this point, we can go ahead and put this breather hose bracket on. It slides right onto the stud down here, and then it should line up that bolt hole down there. Let's go ahead and put the air filter back in, and then we can put the top back on here. Now we can slide this right onto the throttle body, press it in as far as it can go. And then of course you're going to want to make sure that you clamp it down. You do not want to leave this loose. Let's put on our clamps for this to hold it. Double check to make sure this clamp is tight. Let's go ahead and grab this hose for the breather. Slide that right on there. Now we're going to go ahead and plug in our air temp sensor. Press this right on, listen for a click. Give it a tug to make sure it's secure. All right, so we got the hardest ones done that are located underneath this area right here. As you can tell, the forward ones are going to be much easier for you to be able to have access to, and I don't necessarily need to show you how to do it because you saw the harder part. Now what you're going to want to do is just go ahead and start up the vehicle. We want to make sure that we don't have a check engine light. Assuming everything feels good and you don't have a misfire, go ahead and take it for a road test.